In 1827, it was a lofty goal: build a railroad between Baltimore, Maryland, and the new state of Ohio. Particularly lofty since no one at that time had built any railroads at all in America. But that was the kind of entrepreneurial vision that was driving the up-and-coming United States of America.
Well, the B&O, again, right place, right time, right amount of money, right number of people in the right place doing the right thing, and the B&O Railroad was the first one to get going.
The story of the Baltimore and Ohio is the story of America in the early 19th century. A smart meritocracy, always looking for a new way to grow and become great. In 1827, the city fathers of Baltimore, Maryland, were troubled. The great cities along the nation's east coast were in a race to establish a link to the nation's heartland. It was the era of the canal, man-made waterways that carried freight and people. It was the nation's first economic boom. And the granddaddy of all the canal schemes was the Erie Canal, celebrated in song and deed. It stretched from Albany, New York, on the Hudson River, to Buffalo on the shores of Lake Erie. Completed in 1825, it was an instant success. Now goods could travel from New York City to the west without ever having to go overland by foot or horse. In the minds of her city fathers, Baltimore was now all but irrelevant as a major seaport. Philip Evan Thomas, the father of American railways, and George Brown were not going to let that happen. Brown was an Irish-American investment banker, a financier par excellence. On February 12, 1827, he gathered together 24 of Maryland's leading merchants at his Baltimore home. Among them was Philip E. Thomas, a staunch supporter and advocate of Brown's ambitious plan of a railroad to make Baltimore competitive with other eastern seaboard ports. They were so persuasive that within days, stock was issued, and the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad became the first U.S. railway chartered for commercial transport of passengers and freight. 1 year later, construction began. The B&O's track was only 13 miles long, but it was heading towards Ohio. It caused such excitement when it opened in 1830 that Charles Carroll, the last surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence, laid the cornerstone. And it inspired America's greatest man of letters, Ralph Waldo Emerson, to write, "The Americans take to this little contrivance, the railroad, as if it were the cradle in which they were born." But the B&O still had to prove that a train could actually run on the track. Thomas was sure that the future of American railroading was the steam engine he had seen in England. Proof that it would work fell to inventor Peter Cooper and his little steam-powered locomotive named, appropriately, Tom Thumb. Designed and built in 1830, Cooper needed to convince owners of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad to use steam engines. As legend has it, an impromptu race with a horse-drawn car was set up as a demonstration. The tiny but powerful Tom Thumb jumped to an early lead. Then when victory seemed assured, a belt slipped off a pulley and the engine lost power. In spite of losing the race, the demonstration was deemed a success. The next year, with the railroad committed to the use of steam locomotion, American railroading was underway. Interestingly, Peter Cooper would go on to invent and patent something completely different: America's most recognized dessert, Jell-O. A new concept emerged in railroading in 1831, the spur line. In that year, the state of Maryland granted the B&O a charter to build a line from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. The Washington branch was opened in 1835 with much fanfare. Here's where the connecting glue of railroads, the glue that would bind the nation together as never before, gets interesting. In 1843, Congress appropriated $30,000 for construction of an experimental 38-mile telegraph line between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, right along the B&O's right-of-way. The B&O approved the project, but with a far-reaching, ingenious caveat. The railroad would have free use of the line upon its completion. On May 24, 1844, the line was officially opened as the telegraph's inventor, Samuel F.B. Morse, sent his immortal first words, "What hath God wrought?" from the B&O's Mount Clair station to the nation's Capitol building. From that point on, railroads and telegraphs would run hand in hand across the nation, tying the country together with words and goods. The Baltimore and Ohio would produce American railroading's first great fortune. A man whose name is today synonymous with medicine, Johns Hopkins. Indeed, the bulk of Hopkins' vast millions was made by his judicious investments, particularly in the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, an enterprise of which he became a director in 1847 and chairman of the Finance Committee in 1855. Like a number of other railroad robber barons, late in life Hopkins turned to philanthropy, creating the Johns Hopkins Hospital, the Johns Hopkins University and its associated divisions, in particular the schools of nursing, medicine, and public health. The fantastic success of the Baltimore and Ohio spurred a frenzy of railroad building in the pre-Civil War years. In 10 years, the amount of track laid tripled what had been done in the previous 20 years. And yes, Baltimore and the Ohio River were connected by rail in 1852, when the original B&O line was completed to Wheeling, West Virginia. And by 1860, it reached the Queen of the West, Cincinnati, Ohio. And for a time, Baltimore was the second largest city in the nation, a city that welcomed the billowing smoke of the steam engine.
Hi, I'm Bill Ambrose. If you like this video, subscribe so we can bring you more programming from our studio. Thank you for subscribing.